Picture yourself on a blistering plain in the Holy Land in the summer of 1191. The air is thick with dust and heat, the kind that dries your throat and tightens your grip on your weapon. Across the horizon, banners ripple in the wind above the ranks of Saladin's army, seasoned soldiers who have marched through years of brutal campaigning. You are confident. You have numbers. You have experience. And then you see them. A line of riders in white mantles marked by red crosses moves forward in absolute silence. No scattered shouting. No reckless advance. Just a unified wall of horseflesh and steel advancing with deliberate purpose. The ground begins to tremble beneath thousands of pounds of armored momentum. In that moment, something shifts, not in the terrain, but in the mind. Because every veteran on that field understands what is about to happen. The Knights Templar do not posture. They do not test the line. When they charge, they commit fully, and they do so together. The psychological shock hits before the lances ever lower. You are not facing individual men seeking glory. You are facing an order that has already accepted death as the cost of obedience. Discipline replaces fear. Formation replaces ego. And when that formation breaks into a thunderous gallop, it feels less like an attack and more like inevitability. So the question becomes unavoidable. What kind of warrior makes entire armies hesitate? Why, in an age defined by violence, did no one want to fight a Templar Knight? To understand why the Templar Knights inspired such fear, you have to go back to the year 1119, to a fragile Christian kingdom clinging to survival in Jerusalem. The First Crusade had succeeded in capturing the city, but victory did not bring stability. The roads leading to the holy sites were dangerous, infested with raiders who preyed on pilgrims traveling from Europe. These were not organized battlefields with banners and trumpets. They were ambushes in narrow passes, sudden violence in open desert, caravans looted and left burning under the sun. The Kingdom of Jerusalem lacked the manpower to patrol every mile. What it needed was not another temporary army, but a permanent solution. That solution began with a French knight named Hugh de Payens. He was not a king, not a wealthy baron, not a man commanding thousands. He was a minor noble from Champagne who proposed something radical for his time, a brotherhood of warrior monks. Along with 8 other knights, he offered to dedicate his life not to conquest or personal gain, but to the protection of Christian pilgrims. They would live as soldiers but under religious vows. They would fight, but without the usual incentives of land, titles, or wealth. These original 9 knights took solemn vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. In a feudal world driven by inheritance, marriage alliances, and property, this was extraordinary. Poverty meant no personal wealth. Chastity meant no family lineage, no heirs. Obedience meant surrendering individual ambition to a higher authority. 4 men trained from childhood to seek honor and advancement. This was a complete redefinition of purpose. Their identity shifted from individual knights seeking glory to members of a disciplined order seeking mission above self. King Baldwin II of Jerusalem recognized both the need and the potential. He granted them quarters on the Temple Mount, in what Crusaders believed were the remains of Solomon's temple. From that location came their formal name, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Over time, that became simply the Knights Templar. The symbolism mattered. They were not wandering mercenaries. They were guardians stationed at the spiritual heart of the Crusader kingdom. As their reputation grew, so did their support in Europe. Donations of land, money, and recruits flowed in. Crucially, the order received papal approval, placing it directly under the authority of the Pope rather than any local king or lord. In practical terms, this made them independent of feudal politics. They answered to Rome alone. No monarch could command them at will. No regional noble could redirect them for personal disputes. Their chain of command was centralized, clear, and insulated from local interference. This structure transformed them into something medieval Europe had rarely seen: a standing, transnational military organization with a unified mission and consistent rules. They were not seasonal levies called up for a single campaign. They were not mercenaries negotiating contracts. They were a permanent institution. Their members trained continuously, lived communally, and operated under a standardized code that governed everything from diet to battlefield conduct. For a modern audience, especially those familiar with corporate governance or institutional design, the genius of this structure is obvious. The Templars eliminated divided loyalties. They removed personal incentives that could undermine cohesion. They built an organization where authority flowed in one direction and commitment flowed upward in equal measure. Every knight knew his role. Every knight understood the cost of failure. Every knight had surrendered the distractions that diluted focus. This is what set them apart from the typical medieval warrior. Most knights fought for land, ransom, or prestige. The Templars fought for an idea, reinforced by daily ritual and reinforced by vows that bound them tighter than contracts ever could. They were not hired swords. They were a religious military order forged in discipline and unified by belief. By the time their numbers expanded beyond the original 9, the foundation had already been laid. What began in 1119 as a modest brotherhood guarding dangerous roads would evolve into one of the most formidable institutions of the medieval world. And it all started with a simple but radical premise: that faith, structure, and absolute commitment could turn ordinary men into something far more formidable than mercenaries ever could be. If the origins of the Templars explain who they were, their discipline explains why they were feared. What set them apart was not mysticism or legend, but system. They lived under a formal rule derived in part from the monastic traditions of Saint Benedict, then sharpened for war. This was not a loose code of honor. It was a binding framework governing behavior, diet, clothing, speech, sleep, and combat. A Templar owned nothing personally. He could not indulge vanity. He could not pursue private ambition. Even small breaches of conduct were met with public correction. The white mantle with its red cross was not decoration. It was a uniform representing surrender of ego. Their daily regimen reflected that surrender. They rose before dawn for prayer, trained through the morning, maintained weapons and armor with obsessive care, and ate in silence while scripture was read aloud. There was no concept of off-duty. Whether in Jerusalem, on campaign, or in a coastal fortress, life followed structure. For a modern audience accustomed to leadership seminars and productivity systems, imagine an organization where every hour reinforces mission alignment. The Templars eliminated distraction long before the word existed in business vocabulary. On the battlefield, that discipline translated into formation warfare of remarkable precision. Medieval combat often devolved into chaos once lines collided. Knights sought personal glory, chasing fleeing enemies or breaking ranks to pursue duels. The Templars did the opposite. They advanced in tight formation, responding to banners and trumpet calls rather than emotion. No knight acted independently. If the banner held, the line held. If the order to charge had not been given, they endured, no matter how intense the provocation. That level of restraint under pressure is rare in any era. Their training was intentionally brutal. Recruits drilled in full mail and padding under punishing heat, learning to fight while exhausted. They practiced mounted maneuvers repeatedly, controlling powerful warhorses amid noise and confusion. Mock retreats tested their obedience. Sudden trumpet blasts forced rapid redeployment. The goal was not merely physical strength, but reflexive compliance. In business terms, they engineered muscle memory so that under stress, execution replaced hesitation. Psychological conditioning reinforced this structure. Daily prayer and constant reminders of spiritual duty reframed fear itself. Death in battle was not failure, it was fulfillment of vow. When a soldier no longer measures survival as his highest objective, he becomes extraordinarily difficult to intimidate. Enemies recognized this. The Templars were not reckless, but they were unafraid in a way that unsettled even veteran opponents. Weapons mastery followed the same logic of repetition. Lances struck rotating targets until aim and timing became instinct. Sword drills were repeated thousands of times. Transition from lance to sword to mace happened seamlessly. Each knight trained to operate as part of a system rather than as a lone duelist. Efficiency mattered more than flair. Their armor evolved alongside their tactics. A long shirt of interlocking mail rings covered torso and limbs, paired with padded garments beneath to absorb impact. A mail coif protected head and neck. Over time, plate reinforcements strengthened vulnerable joints. The great helm enclosed the face entirely, sacrificing comfort for protection. Fighting in desert heat while encased in steel required endurance bordering on severe. But the trade-off was resilience. A Templar could absorb blows that would incapacitate lighter troops. Nowhere was their system more visible than in cavalry shock tactics. When they charged, they did so as a unified mass. Lances were couched under the arm, angled for maximum transfer of force. Warhorses, bred and trained for impact, drove forward in disciplined alignment. Physics did the rest. A synchronized charge could rupture infantry lines and trigger panic before swords were drawn. The key was timing. They did not charge impulsively. They waited for the precise moment when terrain, distance, and enemy formation aligned in their favor. Yet they were not limited to open-field combat. In sieges, they demonstrated versatility. They defended gates, manned crossbows, braced spears against assaults, and operated heavy engines like trebuchets with calculated precision. They could fight mounted or dismounted, offensive or defensive, adapting without abandoning cohesion. This is the mechanical explanation behind their reputation. Remove the myth, and what remains is structure, codified discipline, relentless training, unified command, psychological resilience, and tactical flexibility. In an era where many armies relied on temporary levies and fragmented loyalties, the Templars represented something closer to a professional standing force. They turned organization into a weapon. And on medieval battlefields, organization was often the decisive advantage. Reputation alone does not terrify seasoned soldiers. Results do. And the Templars earned their reputation not in theory, but in blood-soaked fields across the Levant. In 1177, at the Battle of Montgassard, a small crusader force faced overwhelming odds. Saladin, already emerging as the dominant Muslim commander of his generation, advanced with thousands of troops, confident and largely unopposed. Opposing him was a much smaller Christian army led by the young and gravely ill King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem. By conventional military calculation, the outcome should have been swift and decisive. Instead, the Templars formed up and launched a disciplined cavalry charge at precisely the right moment. Their impact shattered Saladin's scattered formations. Panic rippled outward. What should have been an easy victory turned into a humiliating retreat. It was a stark demonstration that cohesion and timing could outweigh raw numbers. A decade later came the Battle of Hattin, and here the story shifted. Saladin, patient and calculating, lured the Crusader army into arid terrain near Tiberias, cutting off access to water under blistering summer heat. Even the Templars' discipline could not overcome dehydration and exhaustion. Surrounded and collapsing, Many were captured. Offered the chance to convert, they refused. Most were executed. Militarily, it was a devastating defeat. Psychologically, it reinforced their image. They would not bend, even in annihilation. To friend and foe alike, that kind of resolve left an impression deeper than victory. The fall of Jerusalem soon followed. During the defense of Jerusalem, the remaining Templars helped hold the walls as long as possible, buying time and negotiating terms that spared segments of the population. They could not prevent surrender, but they demonstrated again that retreat was never their first instinct. When the city was lost, the order did not dissolve. It recalibrated. That recalibration was visible during the prolonged siege of Acre. For nearly 2 years, Crusader forces endured disease, heat, and relentless counterattacks. Siege warfare is not glamorous. It is attrition measured in months. The Templars led assaults, manned defensive lines, and absorbed heavy casualties. Their persistence under grinding conditions reinforced the perception that they were built for endurance, not spectacle. In 1191, at the Battle of Arsuf, that endurance turned into calculated aggression. Harassed for hours by mounted archers, the Crusader line held formation. Impulse urged retaliation, but discipline prevailed. Only when the signal was given did the Templars unleash a coordinated charge. The sudden counterattack disrupted Saladin's cavalry and stabilized the campaign. Once again, timing and restraint proved as decisive as courage. The pattern repeated in Egypt during the Damietta campaign of 1218 to 1219. Floods from the Nile, disease, and logistical strain made the operation as lethal as combat itself. Yet the Templars pressed forward, contributing to the eventual capture of the city. They showed they could operate beyond the Levant's familiar terrain, adapting to river warfare and fortified positions. Not every engagement favored them. At the Battle of La Fourbi near Gaza, Crusader forces faced a massive coalition. The Templars held the front line for hours, allowing allied contingents to withdraw. By day's end, most of them lay dead. It was one of the order's most catastrophic losses. And yet, even in defeat, they reinforced the same narrative. They did not abandon position lightly. Their final stand came in 1291, during the Mamluk assault on Acre. As the last major Crusader stronghold collapsed, the Templars fought street by street. Their Grand Master, William of Beaujeu, was mortally wounded but continued directing resistance. When the city finally fell, the Crusader presence in the Holy Land effectively ended. Across victories and defeats, one constant remained. The Templars absorbed punishment that broke others. They charged when calculation favored action and endured when patience was required. Over nearly 2 centuries of warfare, that consistency built something more powerful than myth. It built evidence. And in medieval warfare, evidence of relentless discipline was enough to make even hardened commanders hesitate before engaging a line of white mantles marked with red crosses. By the early 13th century, the Templars had become something far more complex than a battlefield order. While their reputation was forged in cavalry charges and siege walls, their enduring power rested increasingly on structure, specifically financial structure. In an age when moving money across borders was slow, dangerous, and unreliable, the Templars quietly built what amounted to a medieval banking network. Pilgrims traveling from Europe to the Holy Land faced a practical problem. Carrying large amounts of gold or silver across hundreds of miles invited robbery. The Templars offered a solution. A traveler could deposit funds at a Templar house in Paris or London and receive a coded letter of credit, redeemable in Jerusalem or Acre. It was secure, standardized, and backed by the credibility of a disciplined order that operated across kingdoms. In essence, they created an early form of international finance centuries before modern banking systems formalized such practices. European monarchs quickly recognized the value of this network. Kings stored treasure in Templar vaults, not merely because the buildings were fortified, but because the order's internal discipline reduced the risk of corruption. The same men who enforced battlefield cohesion enforced accounting integrity. Rulers borrowed vast sums to fund wars, fortifications, and political campaigns. In many cases, the Templars were both financiers and fighters in the same conflict. It is a rare institution that can underwrite a war and then help wage it. Their wealth did not manifest in personal luxury. Individual knights still lived under vows of poverty. But the order itself accumulated land, estates, mills, vineyards, and urban properties across France, England, Spain, and beyond. These holdings generated steady revenue streams. Agricultural output supported campaigns in the East. Rental income funded recruitment and logistics. The Templars were not improvising from battle to battle. They were operating on a diversified asset base. For a modern audience familiar with corporate governance or investment portfolios, the parallels are striking. The Templars built recurring income sources, diversified geographically, and maintained centralized oversight. Their command structure ensured that resources could be mobilized quickly. When a campaign required ships, horses, or siege equipment, the infrastructure was already in place. They did not depend entirely on emergency fundraising or short-term pledges from feudal lords. Perhaps most significant was their independence from secular rulers. The Templars answered directly to the Pope, not to kings. This papal protection insulated them from many local taxes and political pressures. No monarch could simply requisition their property without confronting Rome. In a fragmented medieval landscape, this autonomy was extraordinary. It allowed the order to operate consistently across borders, unaffected by regional rivalries. That independence also created political immunity, at least for a time. Their houses functioned as neutral spaces. Their financial services were trusted because they were seen as mission-driven rather than profit-driven. When disputes arose between nobles, Templar estates often remained untouched. They were perceived as above ordinary feudal competition. Yet power of this magnitude inevitably attracted scrutiny. An organization that combined military capability, international finance, and papal backing posed a subtle challenge to royal authority. Warrior monks who were better organized than most armies and more financially sophisticated than many courts did not fit neatly into the traditional hierarchy of the Middle Ages. The Templars' strength, therefore, was systemic. Their military effectiveness rested on discipline. Their financial influence rested on trust and structure. Together, those elements created resilience. They could lose a battle and rebuild because their economic foundation remained intact. They could fund long campaigns without bankrupting themselves. They operated less like a temporary crusading force and more like a multinational institution with a unified mission. In the end, What made the Templars formidable was not simply their willingness to charge into danger. It was their ability to integrate battlefield performance with logistical and financial sophistication. They understood, perhaps instinctively, that sustained power depends on systems. Steel may win a single engagement. Structure wins generations. So in the end, why did no one want to fight a Templar Knight? It wasn't because they were superhuman. It wasn't because they never lost. History makes it clear that they did. Armies broke them. Cities fell. And eventually, politics accomplished what enemy swords could not. But on the battlefield, what opponents faced was something rare in any era: unbreakable resolve. A Templar had already accepted death long before the first arrow flew. That acceptance removed hesitation. Discipline became a weapon as sharp as any blade. Formation replaced fear. Obedience replaced panic. When other lines wavered, they held. When others chased glory, they waited for the signal. And when the moment came, they charged with a force that was as psychological as it was physical. Even after Philip IV of France dismantled the order in pursuit of power and debt relief, he could not erase the memory of what they had represented. For nearly 2 centuries, they proved that structure, unity, and belief can transform ordinary individuals into a force that reshapes history. If you value deep historical analysis and the timeless lessons hidden inside it, subscribe to the channel and join me for the next story. Because sometimes, the past explains power better than any modern playbook ever could.